Hello, everyone. That Weems guy here for yet another episode. We're recording this Monday, January the 16th at 7:20 p.m. And our guest tonight, and this is a little known fact, you know that guy from the Dos Equis commercials that is the most interesting man alive? Well, that guy was patterned, like was modeled after Sherman House. And so, Sherman, introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Lee. That was a very modest sobriquet that you applied to me there. So my name is Sherman House. You can call me Sherm. So I am, well, this is going to be a weird story, Lee. I think you're right. Okay, I have a long background as being a professional second responder going all the way back to the early 1990s. Concurrently during that time, like a lot of people that are in public safety, I had a unique work schedule that allowed me to have multiple jobs. So I worked as an armored truck guard, like literally riding shotgun on an armored truck. So I was on a 3-man crew a lot, and my sole job was to have either an 870 or a Mini 14 and just provide cover for the transport operations that we were doing day to day. So we did both intercity ATM routes, and then also Federal Reserve banks, and then interstate courier, where we would take stuff over long distances, sometimes out of the state even. So I did that. And then I was also going to night school at the time at a junior college, working on a law enforcement degree. So I got that, and then moved around into a couple other fire departments and EMS services, and then eventually left the northwest corner of Washington State and moved to Eastern Washington State, where I worked at the emergency room at a trauma center there. And then I attended Gonzaga University full time, where I played rugby and produced published undergraduate research, which, you know, is kind of unusual, especially in the hard sciences. And then from there, I left and went back into the fire service for a year, and moved home to help my mom out after her husband had unexpectedly passed away. And then left and moved from Western Washington State to Nashville, Tennessee, and to attend the Meharry Medical College. And I was there for 4 years, and then I stayed there a little while longer to complete a residency in hospital dentistry. After that, I attended another mini residency program at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, at the Body Farm, which is colloquially known as the University of Tennessee Human Anthropological Research Center. And yes, it's that place that people have seen on all of the Discovery Channel documentaries. That's basically just experiments set up with decomposing human cadavers, originally founded by Dr. Bill Bass back in the 70s. Completed that, spent more than a decade working in the public health field in dentistry, primarily dealing with what I call the 3 T's, which are teeth, like infections, tumors of the jaws and the maxilla, and trauma. So after doing that, taking us into the pandemic, I left full-time practice and went into academics. So I currently work at a medical school, and that's attached to a hospital, where I am an assistant professor of oral and maxillofacial surgery. And then I'm also the residency program director for the hospital dentistry residency program. And so quick side note to that, in 2006, I became, I was one of the inaugural instructor class graduates from the tactical response instructor class, and went to work for the late James Yeager as the medical program director for the company, drawing on my experience from pre-hospital care. and then also cross-trained as a firearms instructor. That's how I met Tom Gibbons, and the TACCon community, and kind of got into it that way. And then I worked there till about 2013, and then like left in an official capacity, but I was still in a emeritus capacity there. And then would still return to teach on occasion, and taught some seminars and things out there in Camden. And then just recently I've returned to the instructor staff there. So I'm teaching classes at Tactical Response again.
Cool.
And I think that takes us about up to current. Oh yeah, I'm also still currently a reserve police officer here as well.
Yeah, I was looking at your webpage earlier, and I was reminded of the fact that you have undergraduate degrees in law enforcement, cellular biology, and philosophy, which are three fields that just obviously go together.
Obviously, yeah. So the funny thing about the philosophy degree was, my original intention was, I went to Gonzaga University, which is, at the time, I don't know if it's still like this, but they prided themselves on giving their undergraduates a classical education in the Greek tradition. And so you had to take a specific set of core classes that they defined as a classical education, in addition to whatever your major required, and then the graduation, general university requirements. So and philosophy was required. There was, I think it was 9 credits of philosophy was required. But I realized if I only took a few more philosophy classes, that I could get a minor. And then I realized if I took a few more past that, that I could get, a double degree, because, my cellular biology degree is a BS. And I thought, well, I get 2 pieces of paper at graduation. So, and then when I got into it, I was like, oh, I know I got to have this biology degree to be able to get into school, but the philosophy is like what really speaks to me, and it was kind of a good, I'd use it as like a study break between when I'd finished studying the hard sciences. Cause when you are in that kind of program, you're studying every day, like for hours a day. So I would go to the library, do all the hard science and the math and the chemistry. And then I would go home and break out the philosophy books and make it as far as I could before I fell asleep, which was usually just about far enough. So, and most of the philosophy professors are pretty laid back, where it would happen invariably where someone would say like, I didn't quite get through the reading last night, because some of it's pretty thick, and then they'd be like, okay, well, let's just go to the campus tavern, and we'll all play some pool and have a couple beers, and talk about it. And so there was a lot of that kind of stuff. But I always tell people, like, I do use my science degree on a regular basis, but I also definitely use my philosophy degree. And I feel like the philosophy degree is much more applicable to my everyday life, even if I didn't, of course, if I didn't work in the sciences directly.
Yeah. Philosophy professor is one of those jobs for people that went to school a lot but don't want to actually work for a living.
Yeah.
And so they hang out with college students for the rest of their lives and go to taverns and play pool.
Yeah. Well, there's only a few career paths for people that are philosophy majors. And we always used to joke around and say that I think there was 12 of us at Gonzaga that were philosophy majors the year I graduated, out of a school of thousands of people. And we always used to joke and say that, after you graduate with your philosophy degree, you get to sit around and think about how you don't have any money.
Yeah. Of course, I'm laughing as someone with undergraduate degrees in history and political science.
Well, you're close, but I still, you could probably get a job as a commentator on Fox or MSNBC.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And so that's why I went to graduate school, because I knew that I had gotten an undergraduate degree in something that was not employable. Which was not my original plan. Yeah, it was not my,
and it makes you good at Jeopardy.
Yeah, it was not my original plan. I originally was going to be a middle school teacher, and just ran into so many administrative hurdles. I was going to certify in, I was going to be a social studies teacher primarily, but in middle school education in Georgia, you have to certify in two teaching fields.
Yeah,
And so I was social studies was going to be one, and then English was going to be my other.
yeah,
And so I got all the way into my senior year, right up until the point in time where you go to do your student teaching, and just ran into some bureaucratic hurdles.
sure.
And I was closer to a political science degree than anything else because I was going to be a social studies teacher.
Yeah,
And so I had enough credits to um, get the major in political science. I got a minor in history. And if I had stayed one more semester, I either could have been a double major in history or gotten a second minor in English, because
I gotcha.
I just needed two more classes in English to have the minor in that. I
Yeah.
did take two undergraduate philosophy courses because I screwed up and took the wrong one for the
Oh,
prerequisites, and so I had to go back and take the actual other one that was needed
I
for the
gotcha.
class. So
Well, you just made me think of something. I left out one important point about my education, Lee.
what's that?
I do actually have a minor, and it's in bowling. So
As I
for
said,
part
the
of,
most interesting man alive.
yeah. So for my degree, I had to have a PE credit. And you know how like PE classes are a one
Yeah,
credit class, right? So I
yeah,
took beginning bowling,
yeah.
and it happened to be at this bowling alley where there was a pizza parlor in there, and they gave you a discount if you were a student.
Hmm.
And so you could get a large pizza. This is back in the 90s, right? So a
Yeah.
large 24-inch pizza with pepperoni, mushrooms, and black olives for $9.
Wow.
And I'm a young man, living on my own, and so I would buy a pizza on Monday, and I would eat that pizza until Thursday. So it was a very economical thing. So I took beginning bowling, enjoyed it. So I took intermediate bowling, advanced bowling, bowling independent study, and I was a bowling TA. So that picked me up a minor.
Oh man, I'm really flashing back to undergraduate days now, because Arby's used to have the 5 for $5 roast
5 for
beef
5.
sandwich, and I'd
Yeah,
go get a sack of 5 roast beef sandwiches, and that was like 5 meals.
absolutely.
And now, as a political science professor, I use that to teach to my students when they want to talk about increasing the minimum wage. I'm
Yeah.
like, now those same 5 for 5 roast beef sandwiches are 5 for $5.95,
No, now they're
because
4 for 10,
yeah,
and
because
they don't
all
even
the
have the RBQ anymore.
and because all that happens when they increase the minimum wage is the prices go up. And so
Yep,
the increase in the minimum wage, the value of that is
goes
immediately
down.
wiped out.
Yep,
And of course, the audience is now like, what are these two guys talking about, and tuning
yeah.
out. But
We
uh,
have the meats.
yep, man, that was prime living, man. I used to love it when that sign would go up in the window. They're doing that. Like, well, I know what I'm eating for the next 5 nights.
That's right.
And
And they had those little coupons that you got in the mail.
yeah. And we'll go grab those and take off. And so, but you developed a concept called the
Mhm.
civilian defender.
Mhm.
Tell our audience about the civilian defender concept.
Okay, this is kind of a weird, convoluted story. So
Mhm.
hang in there with me. Okay, so back in approximately 2013-ish, I started a blog called Revolver Science. And I basically just talked about, there wasn't a revolver renaissance. Well, shoot, I mean, that was almost 10 years ago, like there is now, where people actually give a darn about revolvers. It kind of sparked me to do it because when I was at a class teaching one time, there was a couple of rookie police officers there, that were in their early 20s. And I showed them the J frame that I carry on my ankle, and they actually had no idea how to like open the cylinder, like eject the empties. They had no idea. And it just baffled me as like, someone who studies these kinds of things, that you would put yourself on the street and not know how to do that, because they're ubiquitous. I mean, they're everywhere, and they're going to be everywhere for probably the next several hundred years. So it was just kind of baffling to me that these kids didn't know. So I started to write, these. They're not really blog posts. They're more like long form essays. Some of them are 5,000 to 10,000 words, depending on what I'm on a tear about. And I just kind of wrote it like fun to sort of educate people. And then a short while later, our friend, the late William Dr. William April, said, dude, there's like 9 people that read your website because nobody cares about rotary assault pistols. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, those 9 people, they give me, 9 likes every time I post something. And he was like, well, that's very, nice of you, but you should change the name of it or something so that it's like more generic format so that you could write about things other than guns that are obsolete and nobody cares about. And I was like, oh, come on. And okay. So I was kind of sitting there, and simultaneously around that same time, you know how like once you become a firearms instructor, like you're now a firearms instructor to everybody that knows you.
Mhm.
And so people would come up to me and say like, hey, you know how it is, like, I was in the Navy and I fired 50 rounds out of a 1911 in 1971, but I definitely, need to get some more training and stuff. Like, where do I start? And so I was like, well, that's a good question. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, if you're trying to get to the point where you're like really a scholar on these kinds of things, it's not just a matter of taking, 1 or 2 classes. It's a course of study, just like school. And I kind of described it in the original Becoming a Civilian Defender article, which is on my website, that I kind of thought about it, almost as being like a PhD level education by the time you're done, because when you total up all the hours, it's probably approaching, 2,500 to 5,000 hours ish, like somewhere around there. If you really go like full send on it, I mean, you could get away with a very solid basis for a lot less than that. But, if you're going into it to really be someone who is, both a historian, a lecturer, and an extemporaneous speaker on that material, that requires a good bit more effort, to truly be a professor on the subject. So I wrote this article that was kind of like an outline of the specific areas of training that I thought were relevant, that are, people off, as Lee, people will take the police officers in my town are trained to do this. Well, I live by Fort Campbell and the Special Forces, 5th Special Forces group there is trained to do this. And it's like, they're not playing the same game that you're playing.
Right.
So, the things that you're much more, is more applicable to your life to know, instead of doing a fast roping onto a building urban assault course, would probably be a medical course or a pepper spray course or a defensive driving course, which a lot of people, that we know are horrible drivers, and would really benefit from even something as simple as like a condensed, evoc course, just because they get in accidents because their situational awareness is so poor. And so I wrote this article, and I just kind of thought like, well, 3 people are going to read this. And one of those 3 people was Tom Gibbons. And he hit me back and said, Sherman, I really enjoyed your article. Would you mind if I used it in the Rangemaster newsletter? And I was like, what? Like, yeah, of course. Like that's, a major deal. And so he did. And, Tiffany, I think, put some great graphics on it, and I ended up like printing it out. And for a long time, I gave like color copies to my students, just because I was like, well, I mean, have you taken a class by somebody that's written something like this, and so I ended up, referring people to that for a long time. And it's still, it's been on there for probably, I guess, about close to 7 or 8 years now. That article's been up there, and it gets reads every day. So I guess it's still doing the mileage. And then occasionally, every month or month and a half, somebody will post it onto Facebook, and then I'll get like, and people will share it, and then it kind of goes viral, and I'll get like a big, huge spike in the ratings. But I kind of use that like as my own litmus test as far as like what's really applicable to what a civilian defender needs. And then kind of like in the ultimate shout out William April in his book, the section of the book that he wrote, with John and Masad Ayub and Craig and Tom and everybody that was that compendium. He actually cited me and said, the civilian defender, as like the person that we're talking about, dealing with violent criminal actors. And so I was like, damn. And so, when I've been at TACCon events before and stuff, and, people are getting their books autographed, I'm like, you want me to autograph my page? So there's a couple books floating around out there and that have my autograph on that page. So
here, pull up your article on my smartphone and let me take a Sharpie and write my name.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's kind of how the idea started. And then when people started the demand for more and more open enrollment medical classes, I took a curriculum that I designed when I was in tactical response, and with James's permission, I said, can I, rename this, change the curriculum to make it, modernized, and then, continue to teach it under my own masthead. And he was like, yeah, of course. Like, I don't, do your thing, man. And so I started teaching a class that I called the HACC, or HACC, Hemorrhage Arrest course, that was basically Stop the Bleed class with the addition of chest seals. So the Stop the Bleed official, like, nationwide curriculum has nothing to do with chest seals, which I think is very important. And so I started doing that in both a 4-hour and an 8-hour version. I've done it down there for you in Athens, and it's vocationally generic. You don't have to be a tough guy or a tough gal to take that class. We've literally had kindergarten teachers and preachers from different congregations. I've been hosted at churches before. There's no I can kind of parse the curriculum and make it more applicable to whatever people's settings are. So I've taught that class probably 100 times, and then people would always ask me to, like, do you ever do any firearms kind of stuff? And I would always, like, point them in other people's directions, and but I would teach, like, at seminars or at Polypalooza and things like that, and teach firearm centric material. But it's always been something that I've really, enjoyed. And so I'll probably start writing a little bit more about those kinds of things there. One of the cool things, as when you have friends in the industry, a lot of times people will ask you to audit their class. Other instructors will ask you to audit their class because they want, they really want your after action report, but also they're kind of doing it as like a peer review to check their material. And so I've had the honor and the pleasure of doing that a few times, and I really enjoy doing that just because my Hebrew ancestors would strike me down if I didn't say, because it's free, but also because I like to talk about I like to talk about the philosophy. I like to talk about doctrine and ideas and how people get to a specific point, and the rationale and the why behind the things that they teach.
Yeah. I wasn't going to bring up the Hebrew thing, but it just plays into the most interesting dentist alive thing. Hebrew who went to, what was the dental school you went to? McNary?
Meharry.
Which is a historically black college, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
The Meharry brothers, though, were actually white. Yeah. And then I went to a Jesuit undergrad, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Just covering all the bases.
Yeah, I think I should be good wherever I end up.
Yeah. All right. Just kind of give the framework of what it is to be a civilian defender.
Sure. So, I arranged the training points in the order that they're probably most likely to be needed. So, I think that, like, if you are a parent or anybody who is in charge of other people, you definitely have to have some core medical knowledge. So, you need to know how to do CPR, rescue breathing, and the Heimlich maneuver. You need to know how to control bleeding. You need to know how to apply a chest seal. You probably should also know how to do some basic splinting, because if you're one of those people whose kids makes it to age 18 without some type of superficial or severe trauma, you're lucky. Most people don't. That doesn't happen. Because most people have coffee tables in their homes, and at one point or another in that child's life cycle, they're going to end up with their forehead on that coffee table at 9.81 meters per second square. And I've seen more injuries from coffee tables in the emergency room over the last 30 years than I've seen from just about anything else. So medical skills, and then driving skills. People spend so much time driving, and they end up getting into self-defense situations that could have been an evasive driving situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I've literally driven away from 2 carjackings, where people were like, okay, so this is probably not, this doesn't adhere to Farnham's rule of stupids. And that was my fault, but I was in school and I had limited resources. But I had a Dodge Magnum with tinted windows, like dark, like 35% tinted windows. And so, the area of town that I was in, I guess people made assumptions and they assumed wrong. So I wasn't an easy victim, and I wasn't going to play what they were asking me to play. So, and a couple of them like literally came up with guns drawn, and I just said, well, and I mean, I know they're not going to shoot at a moving vehicle. Like, what would be the point in that? And so I just drove away. If you don't have that pre-programmed response, and that's something that you've studied, you're not going to do it. You're going to like think about going to your gun. And now that's a whole other ball of wax. If I just drive away from a carjacking, I don't even need to call the police if I don't want to. If I don't have 4 spare hours for Metro Nashville PD to respond on a good day, for a call like that, they'd probably show up 3 days later. Honestly, I mean, we're at like 90 minutes now here for a priority 1 call. So, yeah, that kind of thing. So then also, William April used to teach his part of his curriculum was kind of aimed at getting people to have more global situational and mobility awareness skills, just to be cognizant of like what they're up against and what the criminal element looks like, because so many people don't know. And I know that you know this, but like James Yeager always used to tell this story about like when you're a cop and you do it for a while, especially if you do it when you're an older adult, it's kind of like having a superpower, because you'll go to a place, and he always used to tell this story, but I can't remember which vampire movie it was. I want to say it was like Daywalkers. It was the one with Willem Dafoe and the guys with the crossbows. But he's like, yeah, look, if you look over there, you can see the bartender's a vampire. And that guy over there that's washing the dishes, he's a vampire too. It's kind of like that when you're a cop. You start to get like this awareness that realistic awareness that a lot of people don't see, and you're just acclimated to seeing it. So you can look at somebody who looks like they're doing something innocuous to a layperson, but to the expert, you go, that guy's up to no good. But you don't have to be a police officer to develop those skills. You can develop those skills, as a skilled civilian defender if you put the work in. And it's just one of those things where you essentially just have to open your eyes to the world and see it through a more focused lens. And then, of course we get into things like pistol work, and unarmed self-defense, the things that you're like less likely to use, but if you have one, it would behoove you to have the other. If you do carry a pistol on a regular basis, it would probably be good for you to have some unarmed capabilities and some weapon retention capabilities, just because if I see somebody, especially when I have to travel to areas where guns are, forbidden, when I see people that are carrying guns and I think to myself, like, I'm not carrying a gun. If something bad happens, that's going to be my gun. And I know that they're not going to be able to mount a defense. Um, and so that kind of thing, like, and then of course, like pepper spray, you know, you're much more likely to have to pepper spray somebody than you are to have to shoot somebody or fist fight or jujitsu somebody. But you know, all of those things kind of mesh together. And if you read the whole article, it kind of builds the thesis towards, you know, these are the more high probability skills that you'll need to use, you know, starting with streetwise, street smarts, and self-reliance type skills and lectures. And luckily, thanks to Rob Pincus, you know, at PDN, there's still you know, Williams videos are still memorialized online, and all of that material is still out there. So.
All right. Speaking of medical training, there's someone in the show group asked about how would you go about vetting people who are providing medical training?
Well, I think that with medical training, you should take it from someone who has actually done that kind of stuff in real life. Because until you've seen blood, you know, squirting out of someone under pressure, when you're under pressure to perform and do something to save them, everything is kind of theoretical. And you know, I've heard and seen, you know, YouTube and Instagram videos and stuff from people who, you know, I can tell that they've taken a class and they've kind of like regurgitated material that they don't, you know, personally own. And some of it is, you know, I'm not going to say it's going to like get people killed, but I mean, there's better ways to skin that cat. And, you know, I tell people that like on a, you know, average day for me, in my academic and clinical practice at the emergency room, in the operating room, and in the emergency clinic floor, you know, I pack wounds and control bleeding every day. And you know, not just in people's mouths. And so I literally probably get more of a sympathetic nervous system response from watching an episode of Seinfeld than I do from dealing with bleeding people, because I've been doing it for 30 years. So it doesn't really faze me. And I think that it's important to have somebody who's a vetted medical professional, preferably with pre-hospital care experience. You know, I've done it both ways. I've taken care of people, you know, in ditches and homes and airplanes and helicopters and, you know, everywhere outside of a hospital. And I've taken care of people inside of hospitals. And taking care of people in austere environments is much more difficult than taking care of people in the hospital, because you have effectively unlimited manpower and resources in a clinical setting. In an austere setting, sometimes it's you and me, Lee, and we are literally like buckling down and fixing this thing, and help is coming, but they're 3.5 counties away, and 2 of the major highways into us are out, so they're having to take SR9. So that means that it's going to be, we're going to be entertaining these people, reading them stories, telling them jokes, building a fire sometimes, doing everything we can to keep these people preserved until we can get them transported to a higher care facility.
I am flashing back right now.
Yeah.
And before I go into the anecdote that I'm going to provide, I will say this for the audience. It's not hard to get the certifications to like be a CPR instructor, to be these other. I have on my post record, I am actually an emergency medical instructor.
Yeah.
Anything beyond wrapping a bandage on something in a tourniquet, you don't want to take from me.
Right. Yeah.
But my post record says that I'm an emergency medical instructor.
Yeah.
I went through a 40-hour first responder medical class as part of a certification program here in Georgia.
Yeah.
And I went through this class and I was feeling pretty good about myself. All right, now I've got some training in these areas. Graduated from the class on a Friday. On Tuesday, I was the first person in to an actual honest to goodness CPR like
Mhm.
life critical incident. And thankfully enough people who knew what they were doing got there in time that we were able to save this person.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, self, you just went through this 40-hour class and it's not enough. So
Yeah.
Wednesday morning, I go to the deputy fire chief's office and I say, when is the next real honest to goodness first responder class that the fire rescue service is doing? He said, well, we got one starting in a couple of weeks. And so I
Yeah.
went through that one, and it was 80 hours of training, and you had to do 10 clinical rides on an
Right.
ambulance.
Yeah.
And so I went through that class. I'm thinking, all right, now I've got more practical experience. I know kind of what I'm doing, sort of.
Yeah.
And I'm going home one day and I'm where two highways intersect near my house. I hear a wreck call come out that I know is just a few hundred yards to my left. So I hit the
Yeah.
lights and sirens, take the left-hand turn, run down. I'm the first guy there. I beat everybody else there by like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I jump out and I run up to the two cars and run up to the first one. This is probably in her 40s lady. And there she's like, I'm fine. Check on them. And so I run over to the other car, and it's an Asian couple that does not speak English.
Okay.
And the husband is splurting blood from his forehead. So I'm grabbing stuff, start trying to deal with him. And I glance back over my shoulder, and the woman that is in the other car is in convulsions.
Yeah.
And so I just like wrap as much as I can around the man's head and like grab his wife's hand and put it on
Yeah.
the side of his head, like trying to convince her to keep pressure. And then I
Yeah.
run around to the car where the driver's in convulsions, and I got nothing for this. And
Yep.
I have exceeded my capacity at
Yeah.
the other car.
Yeah.
But I could play that off as I have two emergency medical first responder certifications, a trauma care instructor from FLETC, and Georgia Post says that I'm a emergency medical responder, and I could sell you classes.
Right.
But how quickly in just two real calls did my skills get exceeded?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, I took my very first medical training probably when I was in the 7th grade, and it was in health class.
Mhm.
And, they would show us these real to, those old timey movies, that were reel to
Mhm.
real, where the
Yeah,
projector was loud and it was green. And,
yeah.
everybody would sit there, and they were like these pretty brilliantly produced
Mhm.
practical effect gore films, essentially, that would show you how to do first aid stuff,
Yeah.
including CPR and rescue breathing. Well, I have a younger brother who's also a doctor. His name is Phil. We call him Dr. Phil, and me Dr. House. But he was he developed insulin dependent diabetes when he was 7, and also severe asthma. And him and I were latchkey kids, and we would walk home from school and then, wait at home for several hours until our mom got home. And one day we were at home, and his blood sugar bottomed out. And when his blood sugar bottomed out, he went into respiratory arrest. So the first person that I ever did rescue breathing on was my brother, and I was about 13.
Mhm.
And then it happened again when I was 14. And um, both of these times, the true early second responders in our town were the police, because they were on 24 hours, and everybody else was a volunteer. And so, including the ambulance. And so, the police officers were there, and, like, if they, if they're confident that you know what you're doing, they're going to let you keep doing what you're doing and just relieve you as you need to. And anybody that's ever done that before, I can tell you, like, I'm in pretty decent shape. I do jujitsu, I lift weights, I run on a treadmill, and as a grown ass man, I've got about 8 minutes of CPR in me before I need to take a break,
Yeah,
because
it'll
it's
wear you out.
continuous. Yeah, it's continuous exercise. And of course, you're like, a race car in the red when it's happening, because
Mhm.
you've got somebody who's dead, you're trying to undead them. And it's intense. So a few months after that, I had been trying to stand up a police explorer post in my town as the founding member. And a police officer that was a family friend that I'd known since I was a child. I was actually outside washing my mom's Astro minivan in hopes that she would let me drive it, to go get milk at the grocery store. And he pulled up in his Caprice Classic and said, "Hey, I know you're really good at rescue breathing and CPR. Your neighbors had a heart attack. Will you come with me and help me?" And I jumped into the back of the cruiser, and we literally went probably 8 houses around the corner. We ran inside, and police back in the 90s, they didn't carry, there was no defibs. I mean, defibs were in the ambulance only or in the emergency room. And so we just went inside, and we had CPR masks, and there was this man who was, pulseless and apneic and blue on the sofa, and we pulled him down on the ground and started doing CPR on him. And the first compression that I did after I found my landmark, his sternum came all the way off of his rib cage underneath my hands, and it made a sound and a sensation underneath the heels of my hands that, unless you've experienced it before, it's kind of like how it was in John Carpenter's The Thing. Like, that's the same feeling when the thing bit that dude's arms off when he was trying to do CPR on him. That's what it felt like. It was bizarre. And I remember the panic looked on my face, and I looked at Officer Burnett and I said, "What do I do?" And he was like, "Just keep going, buddy."
Yeah.
And so I just kept going. And we were there, probably him and I, doing cycles of CPR, swapping back and forth for about 10 minutes. And then the fire department came. They defibrillated him a couple times with an old defibrillator that shot a literal blue lightning bolt that you could see. And he actually had a return of spontaneous circulation. So I was lucky in that my first CPR attempt was actually a save. And in the 1,500 to 2,000 events I've participated in CPR since, my record has not been nearly as good.
Yeah. Very few instances in which I have seen CPR actually bring someone back. I've seen it attempted a good bit. There ought to be a special certification for carrying stretchers, because I've helped to carry a bunch of stretchers. I've been on scene for a lot of this stuff. I've done some of the rudimentary things, but man, it's just, when you were describing the sound in the field, there is nothing like the sound of ribs cracking on CPR. Once you've heard it, you'll never forget that sound. And it's like the smell of your first 3-day dead body. You'll never forget that smell. And those are things that you'll just, once you know, and you just can't get rid of.
So that was, I got kind of roped into the business, I guess, by God, at an early age. And that was 35 years ago. So,
I just had those two traumatic, and I guess traumatic is not necessarily the right word for that, but they're just two overwhelming experiences in the beginning. But the more I was around it, the less it's tended to be. Now I don't have like near the hands-on experience of someone that's actually out there doing it for a living does.
Sure.
I did have my own rescue radio number on the fireside for the rescue and everything, but I just it's one of those things that you got to constantly be doing. And I would agree with the assessment there that look for someone who is an EMT paramedic out there doing something versus someone who just has certifications.
I mean, if there's somebody that works in a busy area, like I was talking to a guy, it's kind of funny, at Christmas, I was talking to a buddy of mine that was actually my first assigned rookie. So after I was no longer Greenhorn, he was my first assigned rookie. And he's now the assistant chief of the department that we were on together after 23 years. So, and he said that him and I still hold the record for the most calls in 24 hours, which was 26. 26 calls in 24 hours. And if you're running in a department that is like that, call heavy to where you're just like literally going call to call to call to call, no sleep, no eating, no bathroom breaks. It's embarrassing. Like when you have to go to, a victim's house or you're at a car accident and you run up to where the car's crashed into somebody's front yard and you go, "Hi, could I use your bathroom, please?" Because you kind of want to just go take a leak in the woods, but you also don't want to end up getting a call from the chief. Like, did you pee in the woods in front of somebody's house? You know? So I've done that. I've asked people if I could use their bathrooms, and I always leave it better than I found it. But I really do think that there is a lot of benefit to learning from people who have worked pre-hospital or worked in a emergency capacity of some kind.
I used to work with an officer that had attempted CPR numerous times and had never had a success rate. Success to the point that sometimes jokingly, instead of calling him by his radio number, we would call him by the 10 code to notify the coroner. And when I actually saw my first CPR save, he was at another agency by this point in time, and I was somewhere else. And I'm like, I called him, like, "Dude, you're not going to believe this." And it wasn't. I just saw someone saved with CPR. It's true. It can happen. It can happen.
Just not to you. Just not to you.
It can happen.
It's like I said, in the early 90s when we were just straight up doing CPR and not being, I don't think the science was not surprised that it wasn't working. Once we got defibrillators in the field, now that was a different story, because we realized at that point that moving the blood around wasn't doing any good if there was no electrical activity in the heart. So, or I should say organized electrical activity in the heart. So once we started defibrillating people, we were much more successful. And I've defibrillated people to this day and had good success with it. I'm a big fan of them. Like I always, if I'm on a bus and there's one on there, I keep an eye on it. If I'm in the airport, I like to see where they're at on the walls, just because unfortunately for me, but fortunately for them, I'm often that guy who's there. And so, I try not to get ready. I try to stay ready.
Well, other than CPR and bleeding control, what is the one life-saving skill that the proverbial average citizen should have?
Good question. Definitely the Heimlich maneuver and removing an airway obstruction, especially if you have kids. I think this is going to turn into the War Story podcast, Lee, but I guess that's okay. One of the calls I remember when I was still in my rookie time was I had just finished EMT school, and we got called to a choking baby. And it was very close to the fire station. So we were probably there in like 90 seconds from the time that the call was dispatched. And when I walked through the door, there was these two crying adult parents holding up this infant. He was probably like 8 months. I don't know if that's still an infant, but and the baby it was blue with its eyes bugging out of its head. It held up its arms to me like this, like, "Take me." And I grabbed that baby and I stuck my big ass pinky down its airway, and I knocked a hot dog out of there, a slice of a hot dog out of there. And the baby, coughed a few times, her eyes watered a little. I held the baby, and the baby was happy, and, was wondering why there was this giant fireman with a weird hat on, like, helping them. And I explained to the parents, like, this is how big my pinky is. This is how big your baby's pinky is, which is like the size of a bay shrimp. Like, that's how big around their airway is. So nothing larger than that. You can't feed them anything larger than that, because it will obstruct their airway. Like, I had no idea. I thought, my mom fed me slice up hot dogs when I was a kid, and the dad's like, "Yeah, me too. I still eat them," And so it was like, yeah, don't do that. But airway obstruction and the Heimlich maneuver. I was at TACCon one time, and I actually did the Heimlich maneuver in Texas de Brazil, where a bunch of the instructors were eating, not on one of the instructors either. And I was in the middle of telling the story. I saw someone do the universal sign for choking, because everybody's woofing down the all-you-can-eat delicious meats at Texas de Brazil. And so I said, "Excuse me, fellas." And I went over there and I said, "Hi, my name's Sherman House. Can I help you?" And this lady was like that. And I just went, "Okay, hold on." And I did 1, boom, and shot out, a piece of
Mhm.
sirloin. And I hit her on the back and I said, "Are you okay, dear?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Go ahead and take a drink of water." And she did. And I said, "Did it go down okay?" And she said, "Yep." And I said, "You guys have a great dinner." And I went back to the table and I sat down and I started talking and I was like, "So anyway."
It started the
And
story right back where you'd left off. Yeah.
yeah. And James was like, "Did you just Heimlich maneuver that lady?" And I said, "Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with my story." And so
Yeah.
I went back to what I was talking about. But yeah, especially if you have children, or if you're around children, if you're a school teacher, if you work in any kind of capacity where there's children, that's vital. People choke all the time. And I feel like it's gotten worse since the COVID thing with masks, because
Mhm.
now, your body kind of has a almost involuntary response. If there's something that's too large, you can launch it out. You can't launch it out if you're wearing a mask. So,
That's true. And
yeah,
people won't see your facial expressions
correct.
as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, until you start turning blue.
Yeah. What trauma slash medical skills are being overemphasized in classes and which ones are being underemphasized in classes?
Sure. So I would say things being overemphasized probably is tourniquets. Okay. So, tourniquets got to us through the, TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, the organization that's charged with developing the research and curricula for the Department of Defense. So a lot of times, kind of like how people try to erroneously adapt military and police doctrine to civilian defender doctrine, the sort of the same things happen. So you have to remember, if you're dealing with people in the armed forces, they generally have a helmet and they have body armor on, that covers at least their torso. So extremity injuries are really common because that's the only thing that's dangling out there in the wind. With civilians, yes, you do have the possibility of getting hit in extremity, but what's the more larger target? Well, on some Americans, it's a very, very large target and it's their torso.
Mhm.
So, bullet holes that enter, or projectiles or penetrating trauma of any kind, that hits between the Adam's apple and the belly button really deserves a chest seal. And like I said, unfortunately, Stop the Bleed curriculum doesn't cover, the anatomy nor the why of chest seals. And I think they do that probably, one, for expediency, just so they can, I think it's about a 90-minute curriculum that they do. And then also for the cost, like tourniquets are cheap. You can, buy a gym bag full of training tourniquets and you rarely have to replace them if you just are using those in classes. Chest seals are a different story. They're $12 to $24 for a pack, and they're pretty much single use. Even though they have some training variants, they're still more expensive. I think it has something to do with that. And then maybe also the difficulty in having some people that teach Stop the Bleed curriculum are lay people, which is okay, if that's the only way that you can get it. But the problem is explaining the difference between, negative and positive pressure and lung injuries, and why you have to plug the hole, or at least cover the hole and valve it. So I would say chest seals are an important thing to know, especially if you're, if you're a law enforcement officer, if you're a corrections officer, things like that, because, like penetrating trauma is a real deal. As much as we would like to see that, every police officer wears a vest, it's still much more common, especially in the South, where it's hotter, to see in some times police officers still aren't wearing vests. So, penetrating trauma is a real thing. Also, as you know, Lee, sometimes the vest that you get 5 years ago, issued 4 years later, I don't know what it is, but that vest seems to have shrunk some, and you've got less of it covering you. And so you've got spaces, especially on your sides, that are opened up to projectiles or penetrating trauma. And that's a concern as well, because that injury can occur there. So like I said, chest seals, I think, is an important thing to know. And it's one of those things that if you have somebody is a good lecturer and they can explain it and break it down, it's a really short module. I mean, it's kind of a duh sort of thing. like Carrie Davis at Dark Angel Medical says, like, you seal the box, and if you do that, then you'll be, I think, in better shape and more prepared.
And chest seals can be pretty easily improvised if needed.
Yeah, you can do it with almost any kind of plastic. I mean, I've seen people improvise it with duct tape before. There's lots of ways you can do it. So yeah, it is one of those things, but you have to know why. You have to know why you're doing it. I've also seen people kind of go the other way, where they think like any penetrating wound deserves wound packing. And then they end up like packing wound packing into a, pulmonary injury, into chest trauma, and end up creating effectively a tension pneumothorax because they've filled up the pleural space where the lung would normally be able to inflate into with gauze, with yards of gauze. But there's, you almost just end up killing the person because you've now made it harder for them to breathe instead of actually doing something that's helpful. So it's important to know the distinction between those.
All right. Now there are tons now, and this used not be the case. It's one of those things that, once something becomes a thing in the training industry, we start to see all kind of stuff spring forth.
Yeah.
IFACs, which, when you and I started in the cop business, nobody carried an IFAC. And now it's everybody's carrying one, it seems. There's so many of them on the market. What would your recommendations for an IFAC be? And excuse me, let's define the acronym, individual first aid kit.
Sure. So whatever you get, I think it's important that it has, I mean, there's so many different people that are selling them and making them now, and they're all basically the same thing. And if they're decent, they pretty much all use the same components. It just is a matter of like, what kind of conveyance do you put it into? But, I think that you need to have at least one and preferably two tourniquets, just because if someone has more commonly like a household trauma kind of thing. So like, someone's doing some chainsaw work out in their yard and they don't, use good saw hygiene and end up cutting into their leg, and they, lacerate their femoral artery. One tourniquet might slow it down, but not occlude the bleeding completely, but two tourniquets can. So, I'm not talking about like, I think the mathematical chances of someone getting two extremity hits, there's a possibility there. So it'd be better to have two than to have to do one and then improvise another. You don't want to improvise stuff if you have a store-bought or a pre, designed option available. So tourniquets, I think you need to have a chest seal. I think you need to have wound packing of some kind, whether that's, some type of hemostatic bleeding agent, like Quick Clot or any of its analogs, or if you just have plain gauze, that's fine too. Those are the things. And then gloves. I think it's important to have at least a pair of gloves because you don't want to take home what somebody else has on them. And if, you've got somebody that has some type of bloodborne pathogen disease and you save them or you don't save them and they end up dying, but you end up getting hepatitis C, that's still a loss. So that's pretty much it. Those are the big things. Those are the things, I don't leave home without. I have, I wear like Duluth Trading Company pants all the time. And I have, a soft T wide tourniquet and then a flat packed chest seal and a set of hemostatic gauze with me all the time. Whether, if I'm working on the range, I've got a whole bag, but I always have this stuff on my body, even when I'm at work, in scrubs. So.
All right. What about emergency dentistry? We've had natural disaster, which you look just this past weekend across the Southeast here in Georgia, we had tornadoes take out several towns.
Sure.
Last year, a tornado took out an entire town in Kentucky. Had hurricanes hit Florida earlier. And quite frankly, folks, we're about 3 days away at any given time from total societal collapse if the food supply gets shut off or powers out for more than 3 days.
Yeah.
Uh, what's some of our emergency dentistry things that people need to have, like rudimentary?
Well, the thing that we see, and it still happens, unfortunately, even in first world countries, is and in third world countries, it's one of the top 5 causes of death is a dental infection of some kind. And they're kind of they don't happen overnight. They usually have like some type of prodromal episode that leads up to it. So someone's eating a rack of ribs and bites into a bone and breaks a tooth, and then they go, oh, you don't have time to get this fixed, or I don't have any more dental benefits for this year, so I'm going to wait until they turn over January 1st. Well, that tooth has died, and now it's started to decompose inside your jaw, and all of the liquid, all of the blood supply, the nervous supply, and the lymphatic supply in the tooth undergoes a process called liquefactive necrosis. So just like at the body farm, if you leave somebody laying out there in the sun, after a few days, they're not going to look like a person anymore. They're going to look like they got 40 weight motor oil coming out of them. Same thing, that's called liquefactive necrosis. So that means that all of the autolytic enzymes that we have in our bodies all the time, along with bacteria, start to break us down. That happens actually inside the tooth. So you end up with this dead tooth that is decomposed inside your jaw, and now you initiate like essentially a foreign body reaction. Your body recognizes that something is wrong, something is foreign, there's some pus in there, and we need to wall it off. And it's not always effective at walling it off. So it can spread, and it can spread if it goes north, it goes into your cavernous sinus, which is contiguous with your brain. And if it goes south, it can go through your neck and end up in your mediastinum, which is the compartment where your heart is. And those are lethal. And it can also just turn into a case of like septicemia, where someone becomes septic and then their organs start to fail and they die. And unfortunately, we still see probably about 25 to 30 of those a year.
And that's here in the US.
That's here in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, with everything functioning.
With everything functioning and everything available. Yeah. And so it's still a danger. So my biggest advice to people is if you have something wrong with your mouth, like today is the day to fix it. Like I don't make money off of seeing patients anymore. I'm paid a salary by my school. So I still see patients mostly in a supervisory capacity or a teaching capacity, but I don't make any money off of it. So I'm not trying to line my pocketbook here, but if you have a problem, go to a professional in your area and get it fixed now before it becomes a problem in the future. The other thing I would say is if you're the prepared type person, then it would behoove you to have antibiotics that are probably in the penicillin family, and then something that is in the penicillin allergic family to treat dental infections, because that's what we give for first line drugs. But one of the cool things about my job, I always tell people is, 1850s dentistry works every time. And what I mean by that is you got a problem with a tooth, taking it out, it's always extracting it, it's always going to fix it. And so, I would have done really well, 175 years ago, because I'm really good at it. I'm an exodontist primarily. That's what I do, is extract teeth. And so, it's not something that I would ever recommend a lay person attempt, because if you screw it up, you're going to make the problem worse. And you have the possibility of like fracturing someone's jaw, which has its own set of hazards that goes along with it. And unfortunately, I always jokingly say, being this close to the hills of Kentucky, we have people that come to the school that have attempted home surgery on themselves, thinking that they've done a good job, only to find that they've fractured their jaw, they've broken off bone, and they think they've gotten the tooth out, but they've broken the crown off of the tooth. They've not got the root out of the tooth, which is the other 3/4 of it. And so it still sits in there. It still abscesses, and it still causes a lot of problems. So if you have a dentist in your area, or your neighborhood, I should say, that's your friend, or if you're close to me, you can be nice to them and barter with them or something after the end of the world happens, for them to continue to be your healthcare provider and keep you safe from that kind of stuff. Because yeah, you're right. I would say, just with what I saw during the COVID shutdown, because they shut down all dental offices here, we're called the dental safety net clinic. Like, that's what we're named by the state, so that in the event of an emergency, we still function, in an emergency capacity to be able to, we're not doing fillings, we're not doing, crowns, and I'm not really the guy that does that kind of stuff. I'm the guy that you go to for bigger problems. And so we were busy, the whole time during COVID, because everybody else was shut down. So like the dentist that you've been going to for 20 years, that guy's was, padlocked.
Yeah.
And under orders from the state not to do anything. And most of the people that are out there, they don't really deal with emergencies like that. They will send you to an oral surgeon, and a lot of those guys, they didn't totally shut down their practices, but they definitely made it difficult for them. So in that time, the amount of emergencies that we saw increased, about 5-fold.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on trauma care and dentistry that we want to touch on before we move on to the other topics?
No, I think that's probably about it.
All right. I'm struck by the news this past week. The Illinois has now passed a statewide, for lack of better words, assault weapon ban. I saw a term on your webpage today that cracked me up: crime bill babies.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me several episodes ago. Randy Harris and I were talking about the Glock 26s and everything, how those came into being. All that genre of gun was a direct result of the 1994 crime bill, where the gun manufacturer just sawed off the grips at the whatever it was 10 rounds would be. And people that have come into the whole training world since 2004, they don't really have they don't have any memory of that, don't have a lot of knowledge of that. And we're starting to see pockets of that pop up back around the United States. So we're going to see lots of lawsuits popping up again around the United States, and it's going to get, if they make it to this current Supreme Court, we'll probably see some of them struck down. But if they make it to the Supreme Court that we might have in 5 years, that might not be the case. In my travels, I have twice accidentally felonied by accidentally entering into an area that had a 10-round capacity limit, and even though I was legal to carry there under LEOSA, everything. So that's one of the reasons I went out and bought a Glock 48. It was my 50-state travel gun. What would your suggestions be for the quintessential 50-state legal handgun?
Well, depending on how, what the person's, I guess, brand preferences. I mean, you can kind of go several directions with this, but I'd say any 10-round, single or double stack or split stack or whatever you want to call a magazine, whether that's a Shield, whether that's a 43X, whether that's a Glock 48, whether that's a SIG P365. I think that those are all good choices. If you're, what does Daryl call us? The Gen X FUDs or something like X FUDs or something like that. If you're somebody that wants to go that direction, I have an 8-shot 357 revolver that has a 2-inch barrel that is really comfortable to carry in the car, and is actually pretty concealable. So, I mean, something like that would not be beyond the pale. I think it's, you lose 2 rounds as opposed to one of those other pistols, but there's no state where that's not legal. And the other advantage to that is the states that have a magazine restriction and an ammunition type restriction, you can still get 38 or 357 ammo that is non-expanding ammunition that is still pretty stout, that has a good service history. Like I'm thinking like, in a barrel that short, like probably something like a 158 something.
Yeah. I think the quintessential recommendation for that's been the federal gold medal match wad cutter.
For
138
short
grain.
barreled revolvers in
Yeah.
38. Yeah. With 357 and short barrels, you have just such a pronounced muzzle blast and so much unburnt powder with such a velocity loss because you don't have enough runway to send it up. The people that do that, like, they're doing that because they don't know.
Yeah, Georgia Arms has recently introduced
a
38
combat wad cutter thing.
Yeah, and we will be doing an upcoming episode on that round with several of the people that were involved and
Cool.
and getting that off the ground. We just got to get everybody in the same place at the same time.
The big thing for wad cutters, a lot of people that are new to the concept don't get it. 38s give up a lot in penetration. So, almost all of the performance hollow points that are available from all the major manufacturers, probably the best one of them is like the Spear Gold Dot, like in a 135-ish. But they still, do right at the bare minimum, like 13 to 14 inches of penetration after going through denim and ballistic gelatin. So people get around that by going to a wad cutter, and the wad cutter does not have any expansion. It stays its true 357 caliber or 356 caliber after it's recovered, but it cuts a perfectly round hole with that sharp front shoulder on that, and it penetrates pretty well. Excuse me, even through barriers sometimes. So that was the idea behind it. The other thing is they usually have a little bit more mild recoil because they're fairly low velocity. And they also usually shoot to the sights on fixed sight revolvers. So that's kind of the thought, especially if you have a gun that, could shoot gold dots, but it doesn't shoot them to the point of aim. There's no coincidence between the point of aim and the point of impact. But if you try some wad cutters, I have yet, knock on wood, to see a gun in 38 or 357 that doesn't shoot wad cutters to the point of aim.
Yeah, I was really excited when that gold dot load came out, and I bought a box of it, and does not shoot anywhere close to point of aim in my 365. And I'm like, well, this is useless if it doesn't shoot to where I'm pointing the gun.
Yeah, that's with your SIG.
No, a 3-inch 65.
Oh, yeah. I thought you said 365. Sorry. So I would say, if you try the gold medal match, sometimes they're hard to find, but I've been really lucky with Lucky Gunner and with Midway USA finding them. And then when I find them, I buy the limit, like whatever the limit is that they'll sell. So
there were a couple of questions in where I solicited in the group, and I'm just going to combine them all into one question here.
Okay.
If you're going out now looking for a revolver, old Smith versus new Smith, I know there were several new revolvers introduced recently with red dot mounting options or pistol mounted options, optics on them, sighting systems. What are your preferences there? What would you recommend?
I'm a fan of the older manufacturer Smiths. I have not had good luck with recent manufacturer Smith revolvers. I've had good luck with M&Ps, but not revolvers. I've had a Smith & Wesson model 69 and 44 Magnum where they use a barrel sleeve. So it's like a cover that goes over the barrel, and then the barrel is screwed into the frame. And I had the sleeve, the barrel itself, the top part that has the sights on it, unclock as I was shooting it, so I started to think like, where are these rounds going? I'm not wanging on the trigger. I know that. And then I realized that the front sight was turning counterclockwise on me. And so I got rid of that. And then I also had a 442 that I bought. And I didn't realize it at the time because this was the kind of gun store, because it was actually a good deal. It was $379. So I bought it. But this is the kind of gun store where the one that you look at behind the counter is not the one that they give you. Like they give you one from the back, like of the stack of them. And I didn't realize until I got out of the store that there was a great big huge gap between the crane and the frame. Like probably 3 millimeters. And I was afraid to shoot the gun because I thought it might automatically be out of concentricity with the bore and out of time. So I returned it to Smith & Wesson. They had really great customer service. They fixed it like in 2 weeks and sent it back to me. But that just kind of like made me go, until you guys get your Tennessee facility like all the way spooled up and your revolver game changes a bit, I'm gonna stick with the old stuff. But not a week goes by where I don't see something, in the local gun shop where I'm like, oh man, that's a great buy, but I already got 3 of those, And as far as the older Smiths, as far as the new stuff, Caleb Giddings is working for Taurus now. I'm not sure like what his exact job title is there, but Caleb is a cool guy, and he is just a revolver aficionado, and he's done some stuff to improve their line. Now, as far as red dot stuff, I'm not the guy to ask about red dots because I haven't taken that plunge because I'm still thankfully very farsighted and haven't had any decline with age in my distance vision. So I just haven't taken the red dot sight challenge. And I also kind of feel like Tom Givens, like I've been looking for the front sight for the last 30 years. And if I should try to stop now, I don't think I'd be able to. So if I get to the point where my eyes don't allow me to do that anymore, then I'll make the change. But I can say though that the other Taurus new revolvers, really old Taurus revolvers, were decent too. The ones that were direct Brazilian copies of Smith & Wesson products that were made, I believe, on licensed Smith & Wesson machinery. Like the Model 85s, there was like a K-frame and sort of a N-frame size gun that were made back then. Those are decent. And then these new manufacturer, like the executive grade 856, I think those are definitely a step in the right direction, despite all of the debacle that happened either last week or the week before with that gun tuber, throwing a fit because he couldn't shoot that 856 like he shoots a semi-automatic pistol, and the crane screw came out of the side. Well, I mean, it's not a pistol. You can't shoot it the same way, just like you can't drive, a manual transmission car the same way that you drive a automatic transmission car. The same doesn't carry, the same concept carries over to pistols and revolvers. And you can't put 500 rounds through a revolver without checking the screws, and I think that you're old enough to remember, Lee, like when I went through the cadet academy, we all had revolvers, like there was very few people that had semi-automatic pistols, but they pretty much wanted cadets to stay with, either K-frame or L-frame revolvers. And so when you'd go to the qualification, there were toothbrushes, AUB D-jammers, and then whatever that fancy wood-handled Smith & Wesson screwdriver was. And you were told to like check the screws on your revolver like literally every 50 rounds, and then bang out with the toothbrush behind the extractor star and get all the unburnt powder out, and then make sure that your ejector rod was still turning freely. And so back then it was just, it was part of the culture. Like nobody really thought about it. Well, all that stuff, of course, has gone by the wayside. And if you take, even a gun that has well-fitted screws and you shoot it 500 times, hell, there's a pretty good chance that that torque of firing that thing in a relatively lightweight gun is going to cause those screws to turn the other direction. So you just have to know these things because no one's going to tell you. And I think that like I said, even despite that debacle, I've checked out Chuck Haggard's and a couple of other ones now, and I really like them, and I'll look forward to getting one.
Yeah, I have long had a love affair with fixed-sighted 3-inch K-frame revolvers.
Sure.
But unfortunately, my eyes have gotten to the point where I can't see that ramp front sight anymore. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to have a couple of mine that I'm willing to sacrifice, altered with different
Yeah.
sights put on them, and which I know
Yeah.
is going to involve machining of the guns, but these are ones that have already had some couple of things to them, so they're not collector grade anyway.
Mhm.
I have, in the meantime, have begun experimenting with a couple of Ruger LCRs,
Yeah.
and I like those.
Yeah.
I didn't when they first came on the market, and I think the 38 version, the only one I ever shot of those, was like, yeah, this has got too much recoil for this size gun, and I
Yeah.
kind of dismissed it. Um, I did grab one of the 327 models, and I'm shooting 32
Mhm.
longs in it
Yeah.
and enjoying it. And I picked up one here recently in 22 long rifle, and in dry handling it, I thought the trigger was going to be way too heavy. Actually
Yeah.
going out and shooting it live fire, I love the trigger on that gun.
Yeah.
Um,
Don't let
'Cause it,
Tom catch you carrying that thing.
yeah, well, sometimes things happen. Yeah, children have to go off and do their own, have to learn their
Yeah.
own way
He's gonna say,
sometimes.
Lee, for crying out loud, if you're gonna carry that thing, at least carry two of them.
Yeah. Um, I carry those guns in places where I can't carry guns.
Sure.
That's what I phrase it. Places that I term as high headache areas,
Yeah.
where I'm legally allowed to carry because of Leosa and other things,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of headache if I get discovered, and
Yeah.
I find them easier to conceal than some of the other options out there, and so
Yeah.
that's when I use them.
Agreed.
Um, you and Claude Warner
Hmm.
have been recently posting pictures of a certain inscription that you put on firearms.
Oh yeah.
And I had someone that wants to ask, what is your recommended font and size of lettering to scrape your message into a firearm?
Okay. I like sans serif, and I think a 26 is a good way to go. Yeah.
Tell everybody what we're talking about here.
Okay. So I stole this idea from Claude Werner, who got it from his father. But one of the concerns I've had, traveling with a gun in checked luggage, declared checked luggage, is I worry about TSA stealing it. And so I thought, like, what's a good way to deter that? And my buddy, the late James Yeager, said, like, have the gun in the box, like, disassembled, because they probably don't know how to put it back together, and that'll dissuade them. And I was like, huh, okay. So I tried that for a while, and I was like, I don't know. They might still be like savvy enough to like know where the guide rod goes and how to put it back in the barrel and stuff. And so I ended up getting a Smith & Wesson model 6904, which you remember is a third generation 12 shot 9mm, kind of like the Glock 19 before there was a Glock 19.
Yeah.
I first learned about it with Dave Spalding when he was writing for Guns and Weapons for law enforcement and combat handguns through Harris Publication way back when. And so anyway, I got one of those, and I had one of the sergeants at my first police department engrave on the top of it, stolen from Sherman House, Nashville, Tennessee. And because he was like, like the property room guy that was a wizard with the engraver. So everybody would always have him engrave their cuffs or their knife or whatever. Yeah. And he had such great handwriting. Those are hard to do with those engravers, but he was so good at it. So he did it on mine. And then I used that gun for traveling, and it's kind of cool for travel, because if you take the slide off that thing and then you hide the slide stop like down in the foam to where they're not going to immediately find it, you can't put the gun back together. Right. So congratulations, you've stolen my gun that says stolen from Sherman House on the top of it, but you can't do a damn thing with it. So good job. And then, at one point I did one on a shield that I use for travel sometimes. And then I did one on my full-size Smith. And then it just kind of turned into a thing where, I thought, like, if the gun gets stolen while I'm traveling, or if somebody gets the best of me someday, y'all be able to figure out who it was.
Oh, one more question. Uh,
Sure.
Brian Eastridge of the
Yeah,
EDC Belt Company. And
sure.
I
So
always, is it
off
on
duty,
duty,
on
off duty,
duty.
off duty, on duty? Brian Eastridge, everybody on the show will know who
Yep.
Brian is. Wants to know why he always, why he feels like every time he's talking to you, you're judging his teeth.
Oh, well, I'm not judging him. I'm just assessing how easy it would be for me to snatch him out.
Well, Greg Elephant replied to that he solved that problem by going to you as his dentist and having you fix his teeth. And
Yeah,
so
that's
now,
true. Well, I guess that doesn't break the HIPAA rules if he said it.
yeah. Uh, in closing, I know you're back teaching at Tactical Response.
Yes, I am.
Just tell our audience about what you're teaching there, and if you have anything you would like to say about James, feel free to throw that in there as well.
Sure. So, I've always kind of thought of myself, as a martial artist, and I do believe that shooting is a true American martial art. We were the people that kind of perfected it and brought it to its current state.
Mhm.
And when I first met James, I had already been shooting for about 15 years and training. And then when I met James, I had never met somebody before that had philosophy to go along with the doctrine, and like I said, a lot of that stuff is contiguous with Andy Stanford and with Tom Givens, who I met later on. And so, James was a dear friend of mine. He was, one of my best friends that I've ever known. And one of the first real friends that I met in Tennessee when I moved here from Washington. And so, like I said, I worked for him for several years and, always had a great time. And I felt like we really moved the needle on a lot of things. And then unfortunately, this past fall, he succumbed to ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and passed away very quickly. And so, I hadn't, I guess like I still have his number in my phone, and there's times where like I see him on YouTube videos and stuff, and I still feel like he's here, even though he's not. But I still remember, and I have like my notes from so many of his classes, and things that he said over the years to me, like as I was an instructor for him, about how to tighten up my game. And, I started to think about it like, what can I do to help move his legacy along, and I feel like as a martial artist, you have a duty as the pupil of whoever you studied under to, continue their work and give attribution to them for the things that you learn for them. So I talked to James's family, who's now running the administration of the business, and asked them about going back, to be an instructor there again. And they were all for it. So I'll be doing that again on a regular basis. I just taught a shotgun class this past Saturday and Sunday, and I'm teaching a rifle class next weekend, and then a pistol class the 28th and 29th of this month. And then probably next week I'll post what my schedule is going to be for February. But yeah, I'm teaching in Camden, Tennessee. I probably won't be teaching any road classes just because it's difficult with my academic schedule at this point, unless I, have vacation days and it's planned well in advance. But yeah, you can catch me in Camden, and I'll be teaching there for the foreseeable future. And like I said, when I go into my jiu-jitsu academy, there's, 3 pictures on the wall, one of Carlos Gracie, one of Helio Gracie, and one of Holmes Gracie. And, my professors trace their lineage to those guys, and so like, I trace my lineage as an instructor and a professor in our art, to, guys like James and Tom and John Farnham, and so I think it's important to give attribution to your lineage, where you came from and where those guys came from. Tom was a mentor to James. And, you know, Farnham was a mentor to Tom. So, you know, and it goes all the way back. And I think that's a really cool thing for us to be able to, you know, pay homage to where we came from, but also allow us to understand the history that's behind it and the history of the development. So that when somebody says, hey, Lee, have you heard about this new greatest, you know, thing to do this? And you're like, no, that's complete crap. Like Dave Spalding was doing that stuff back in 1988, you know, and then they're like, what? I never knew that. Well, of course you didn't know that because you didn't drill down deep enough, you know? So I think that I really am excited that in the training industry lately, it's kind of taken a little more of an academic perspective amongst our peers. And people are really actually being mindful of, like, when you guys did the combat triad or the, you know, triad the other day, you know, I was like, damn, like you guys talked for 90 minutes about something that's like pure philosophy, and it was great, you know, but you know, there's dozens of us that are interested in that, literally dozens of us. And so, you know, trying to get other people to capture that, that kind of spark and see the importance in that. Whereas a lot of people might just think that's minutia. You know, if you consider yourself to be a true student of this craft on the path to mastership, which we'll never get, but if you're on the path, then, you know, it behooves you to know these kinds of things and be able to speak about them intelligently, or at least be able to listen with a good frame of reference and understand what they're talking about. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
You know, as you were
I
talking
could make
about
a lot more money on the weekends, you know, going and shucking teeth in the ghetto and draining abscesses, but I do enough of that during the week. And I really, I don't feel, I've never felt like teaching firearms instruction, even in horribly inclement weather, is really like work. It's more like fun that you're also getting paid for. And more importantly, it's fun that, you know, now you've been an instrumental part in a 16-hour weekend for someone that they're going to remember. If that's their only class, they might remember that forever. Even if it's their 100th class, they might still remember it forever because they got something useful out of it. So I think it's a valuable pursuit.
as you were talking about teaching classes in January and February in Camden, Tennessee, first thought was, you know, you could tell folks it's Tennessee, the weather's not going to be really that bad. And then I remembered a certain class of April in
Yes.
Tennessee.
And it was snowing.
And it snowed on us to the
Yeah.
point we had to go into a building and take warming breaks because people's fingers were getting so cold that they couldn't operate the slides on their pistols. Anything you would like to discuss or add that I did not ask you about tonight?
I don't think so. I think we hit a lot of stuff.
All right. Tell people where they find your Civilian Defender webpage and your
schedule.
Civiliandefender.com.
And I'm on Facebook as Sherman, Sherman House, House. And that's where I post all of my tactical content. And then I also put my tactical response schedule there as well.
Yeah, it's funny because you had left Facebook for so long that when I got the friend request of the day, I was like, is this a scam? And so I was texting
there was about 20 people that texted me and was like, is this really you? And I was like, yeah, it's really me.
Yeah, and then I went into a group on Facebook and there was someone, hey, Sherman's back on Facebook. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it is really him.
You know, the thing that I didn't realize about Facebook until I tried to post links on Instagram is you can't post links on Instagram.
Right.
So, you know, it's like, hey, I'm coming back to work at Tactical Response and you can sign up for these classes not here. So then I was like, oh, there's got to be a better solution. And so I was like, oh, Facebook it is.
Yeah. Well, all righty, man. Thank you for joining us tonight. And,
thank you for having me.
Thank you. And to the audience, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. We're at like 943 as of the time of the recording. I want to get that up to 1,000 so I can turn on some of the features. And after that, I'm not going to be worried about the numbers on that. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As we know, your time is your most important asset. And We really appreciate you giving some of it to us.